I'm going to leave my camera on for a little bit, but once we get into the demo, I'm going to turn that off just to save a little bandwidth. I think my microphone's been kicking out on me a little bit, but so my name is John Bussart. I work out of Ingram Micro's Business Transformation Center. This is to be I would say maybe a 201 level discussion about VM Essentials. So there'll be no PowerPoint today at all. This will be all a demonstration and a discussion about some of the things that we can look at. And I'll go in from deployment considerations for deployment, creating VMs and all kinds of things. Now, like I said, this is supposed to be kind of a part two to the initial one. So the initial one we had was more of we had a sales presentation, a technical sales presentation. I demonstrated a little bit. I know some people get these links, and may not have seen the first one. That's fine. I'll review some of the stuff that I did in the first one, but this is really meant to be more of an expanded discussion. So I work out of the Business Transformation Center for HPE. If you haven't engaged with the Business Transformation Center, I would highly recommend that you do. I'd say people call us from a high level a proof of concept or a demonstration facility. But I'd say we do a lot more than that. I have hardware from across HPE portfolio, so servers, storage, networking, Ruben and things like that. So I'm cross-platform. I'm reseller facing to people such as yourself, but I'm also end user facing as well. So if you have the needs to see a demonstration, I could certainly do the kind of point and click type of demonstrations you'll see today. But the hardware is open for you guys to leverage however you want. I've had people use the equipment in many different ways. I've had people want to replicate to one of my Electro arrays, so take their Electro array and replicate into my environment and prove to their customer I could reanimate a VM. Right. I had somebody on a Primera show me it was a 100% uptime guarantee, and they wanted me to start a storage vMotion of a VM inside an environment and then start pulling out things, power supplies, hard drives, cables, SFPs. I was down to one fiber cable, one power supply, two hard drives out, and this thing was still rolling along. They signed on the dotted line. But I've had people come in, want to look at my SimpliVity environment, get remote access in my SimpliVity, see how I have it set up and things like that. So I'm open. I have hardware, however you want to leverage that hardware. I'm more than welcome to help you with that. Obviously, today we're here to talk about VM Essentials, or what some people are calling VME. Today, just to give you even a bigger background, so I've been doing this role inside the Business Transformation Center for, I don't know, maybe 15, 16 years. I've been doing it for a long time. I would say before that, I would most closely represent what we'd call a virtualization TC, or a technology consultant. And this is basically back in the day when VMware was a twinkle in everybody's eye, right? And I've been working with VMware since ESX 2.0. They didn't even call it vSphere back in that day, or if some people remember GSX, I did that. But I also did other vendor stuff like Hyper-V, as well as Zen Server was a big thing at the time. So I did a lot of that as well. So I switched over to this role, and obviously, the reason why we're all here is because of the amazing things that Broadcom's kind of doing these days, kind of freaking people out. People have looked at other virtualization solutions that are out there, and in the Business Transformation Center, I certainly have done that as well. And I've looked at things like I know people are looking at Proxmox, but my impression of that is support isn't there necessarily, as well as it doesn't integrate in with shared storage. And a lot of people with VMware virtualized environments are using shared storage technologies. Not that it doesn't, it just doesn't do it very well. There are other solutions that are out there, and Nutanix is certainly a good solution, but I think a lot of people looked at that and thought, well, if I'm going to go pay, to buy new hardware, I might as well just pay the VMware cost and keep on kicking the tire down the road. Some people are looking at Azure Local, but they don't like the kind of the services or the paying just to have hardware on site. So I've certainly looked at some of those solutions. I've even looked at other open source solutions that are out there. So I was very excited to see HPE was going to come out with this solution, and they announced it back at HPE Discover. last year, and they were going to come up with their own solution, and they acquired this company called Morpheus, and then Morpheus is kind of on that same path, so they kind of merged together, and we've got what we're looking at as far as VM Essentials itself. So it was released on December 20th. I was involved with the beta program for it as well, so I've been doing this for a very long time. As soon as it was released, I did deploy it within our environment. I have a couple cluster setups that we can look at. And again, you know, I'm going to go into this in detail, but feel free to reach out to me if I don't hit anything or if you want to see something in particular on this. So let me turn off my camera and let me share my desktop. There we go. Entire screen share. All right. So, and I'll speak to this as if I'll try to relate this to VMware terms because I know a lot of us are familiar with that. They're not exact matches sometimes, but they're close enough for us to have this discussion. So what we're looking at is actually the manager. And I've got two different clusters here, or two different managers, I would say here. This would be most closely to in the VMware environment a like a vCenter system. So this would be the management plane into this environment. Right. It is a virtual machine as well. If I go into provisioning and incidences here, this is actually the incident that contains that virtual machine. And I'll talk a little bit about incidences as we go through that. Um, I want to kind of get your head wrapped around how to interact with this, and then I'm going to show you some of the pieces of the solution that I have available, and then I'll talk about deployment and deployment considerations, hardware considerations, backup considerations. I've certainly have done a lot of these demonstrations, so I kind of know a lot of the questions that people are asking these days. But yeah, if you have something interesting, feel free to type it in the chat, and we can get into it. Um, so when you look at this environment, it kind of has a hierarchical approach. I guess kind of like what VMware does. If you kind of look inside vCenter, it's got the tray off to the left. On the top, you have the vCenter, you have the data center, then you have the cluster, and then the ESX servers and the virtual machines. This is kind of like that. In the infrastructure section, groups would be where you kind of assign your management contexts or rights, who has the ability to go manage inside this environment. Clouds, I would say, um, in this context, it would be, your management interfaces like vCenter. As you can see, I'm managing a vCenter incident here, as well as and they still got Morpheus here, but this is VM Essentials, this management interface that we're looking at here. All right, now, the bigger product is going to be Morpheus Platform Ops. So VM Essentials is a subset of Morpheus Platform Ops. Um, Not all the bells and whistles are there. I would say if you understand this, you can navigate your way around a little bit in Morpheus. Morpheus itself is really meant to be a platform to manage multi-cloud environments, automate the process for deploying applications within an infrastructure. So in a larger Morpheus environment, clouds could be public clouds. Maybe it could be containerized platforms and things like that. But in this context, it's just VMware and Morpheus. Again, in the larger platform, you could have things like Hyper-V, Nutanix, and things like that. A whole variety of different public or private cloud type of platforms. Right, so you've got that. Clusters is pretty straightforward. That's what we kind of know and love. Have you seen inside VMware computers, just the server itself. Networking in this environment. So let's talk about some features of this solution, so we're all on the same plane. So what can this solution do? As far as a baseline of things that I require from a virtualization platform. All right, so can I migrate virtual machines between different hosts without any downtime? Right, the vMotion alternative. Yep, this platform certainly does that. I'll show it to you. Does it have high availability? So if a host fails, well, all those virtual machines power up on another host. Absolutely, this has that that ability. Can I move my virtual machine hard drive files around? So in VMware, that's a VMDK file. In this platform, it is a QCOW2 file. That is the open source um, virtualization format. But can I move those virtual hard drives around between different platforms? Certainly, like the storage vMotion in VMware, we certainly have that ability. Can I load balance virtual machines based on demand? So if a virtual machine cranks up, it's going to start eating a lot of CPU and horsepower. Can I shuffle all the virtual machines around in the environment based on load? Absolutely. And some people would say that would be the DRS alternative. Um, you know, after that, it does have, obviously virtualized switching. I would say if you're going to compare it to VMware, and this would be it, it would most closely resemble a distributed switch. Another solution that this has is, I would say, a software-defined storage or a vSAN alternative. So you can set that up as a part of it. Now, all of these are bundled into the SKU. And if you haven't heard the pricing yet, it's priced per socket. Um, it is term-based, so you're going to get it for a year or 3 years, 5 years, or something like that. But it is socket-based, not core-based. So you could get a single socketed system. You could get one of the AMD DL 325 Gen 11 servers with 192 cores on it and only buy one $600 license and have full support for that system. So that's certainly capability. That license also, and that'd be good for a year. That license is also gives you 24/7 support as well. So it's definitely economical as compared to what the competitors are kind of doing out there. Now that will turn to, maybe we should have a conversation now about compatibility, and I will demonstrate a lot more inside this interface. But let's start talking about some of the things that a lot of people are asking about. So compatibility. What is supported? So I say what's supported as to what this can work on. So support started out December 20th. They supported DL. Well, they support client servers of the Gen 11 flavor. Right, and they also supported the Electra MP storage via iSCSI. All right, now I will tell you that that's changing all the time. For example, I would say a month and a half ago, they added support for the Electra 6000 base system. So this would be I would say the nimble history of solutions that are out there. Via iSCSI, they supported that. And then like a week or two after that, they added the Electra 5000 as being supported. Just recently, I would say, a few weeks back, they added PerLiant Gen 10 Plus systems of the 300 series flavors. So like a DL360, a DL380 Gen 10 Plus, they added to their compatibility list. And just recently, they started adding fiber channel storage. So if you have an Electra MP with fiber channel storage, that is supported as well. Another thing that a lot of people have asked about is PCB or Private Cloud Business Edition, or what we used to call DHCI, right? Is that supported? And I'll say not yet. It is coming soon. As a matter of fact, if your customer buys a DHCI solution today based on VMware, there's a place that you can sign up to get free licenses for up to 4 hosts. For a DHCI for VM Essentials in it, but you definitely do have to sign up for that. All right, so it is coming. It will be supported in a DHCI environment, as well as later on, probably over in the summer, it will be supported on SimpliVity as well. So SimpliVity, they're still supposed to use, as of today, they're still supposed to use OmniStack as their software-defined storage, and the backup features or all the value sense that's wrapped around SimpliVity is still supposed to be baked in, because they're still supposed to be using OmniStack with that. All right, just so you're aware. So a lot of people will ask, well, what about Gen 10 based systems? So I don't know, they might add them, but I would say kind of follow the kind of, what HPE's real goal is in this, right? $600 a year is not necessarily closing anybody's quotas out there, I would say. And it's really HPE is looking for the hardware drag to come across with this. Right? I've heard some mumbling about third-party support, but that's been kind of, being tossed around, or different server manufacturers. And first I heard them say, well, we'll let the other manufacturers support that themselves, and let us know, or qualify it, but they don't want to do support. I've also heard that maybe they'll support that in the largest Morpheus platform ops, right? But as of today, there is no support for third-party storage or third-party servers. This is an HP solution today. That being said, um, I've installed this on pretty much anything. Now, I don't recommend that you do this for your customers, because you want something that's supported, because if they run into trouble, you want to be able to call HPE for support on the solution. But if you got a test and lab environment, you want to kick the tires, it works pretty well. As a matter of fact, this cluster I have running on Synergy Gen 9 blades, completely unsupported at this time. Synergy is not supported, Gen 9 certainly not supported, but it seems to work for me. I also have a virtualized version over here. So nested virtualization, that seems to work as well, although there is some hookups, and we might run into that as we kind of go through that. But if you're looking to kick the tires, it might be something that you can do. I would say if you're going to go down this route, talk to me a little bit. I'll tell you about some of the things you need to do or don't do for that type of environment. But it's pretty resilient, installs on a lot of things that are out there, but just make sure you maintain, what's compatible if this is going to be something you deploy on a customer's environment. All right, so let's get our head wrapped around a little bit of this interface, and then I'll kick off. Maybe we'll do an HA failover, and I'll show you how that works, and we'll talk a little bit more about deployment or creating virtual machines and things like that. All right, so under provisioning, I have incidences. So let's talk a little bit about what an incident is. In the VM Essentials environment, an incident is going to contain one virtual machine in it. All right. In a larger Morpheus environment, it can contain multiples of the same entity within it. So if you need a incident and have 100 virtual machines that are all created the same way, you could do that. All right. Think about it maybe like containers. You might want to have one incident that might contain 100 containers, right, all running like a web server Nginx or something like that. You'd want to manage that as a single entity. So that's the idea behind incidences. And if I take an incident here, and I'll take this one here real quick, and I click on it, we could see it says incident, and that would be the incident name. If I scroll down a little bit, this would be the actual virtual machine. And it's unfortunate that they have the same name, but that's the idea. And if I click on this again, you'll notice it says compute and then the virtual machine name. And it's going to be a little bit important to notice where you at in the context, because you don't see your menu items of what you want, or your action items, right? They're different at an incident level at a virtual machine level, as opposed to a incident level. All right, you'll get different options. And most importantly, there are backups. All right, so let's hit on backups a little bit. So I talked about support, what they're supporting today. All right, so if I have all the basics in place, right, as far as the vMotion alternative, the DRS alternative, the HA alternative, those pieces, right? So my eyes turn to backups. What's supported as far as backups are concerned? Well, certainly this solution has the ability to do snapshots, and I'll show you a little bit of that. All right, so just like VMware does snapshots, this has the ability to take virtual machine snapshots. Just like when you think of VMware, you don't want to leave snapshots around. The same thing's true with this as well, right? Because you're creating the Delta files that kind of exist in the environment. All right, but they're nice to have if I'm going to apply a patch to a VM, all right, an update or change something in the environment, and I want a quick way to roll back. Snapshots are a great thing to use. There are also backups within this environment. They're full-fledged backups that you can take and offload to an external repository. And if I go under infrastructure here, you'll see storage down here. And this will be kind of where I keep my ISO image library, my virtual machine templates, or I can also designate backup repositories in this as well. And they can be buckets, so things like an S3, Amazon S3 account would work, Azure would work. In my case, I'm using a file share for my backups, but you can use CIFS if you wanted. You can use local storage, although that's probably not much better than snapshots. Or you can use NFS, and that's what I have here. I'm using an open source NFS server that's out there, and that's where I'm placing my image repository as well as my backups. Now, the backups in this can be schedulable, right? They can be full backups and they can be incremental backups, all right? Now, you're not going to be able to pull out database tables or files from within a system, but this gives you baseline backups for the environment. So usually at this point, everybody will stop and say, what about third-party backups into the environment? So this is what I'm telling you. The industry is working quickly to get there. All right, when HP is as big of a vendor as Broadcom and VMware is. So when HP announces that they're going to come out with a virtualization stack, right, the third-party vendors all jump on, right, and they're all going to kind of you know build integration to this. So I'll tell you the vendors I have the most closest relationship to and what I've heard. All right, so Veeam is certainly working on this. All right, Commvault is certainly working on this, as well as Cohesity. All right, those are the people I have the closest relationship to. Now, originally, so all these vendors today will say that they support backups of VM Essential using agent-based backup. And if you don't know what that means, for example, in VMware, that means, how you'd back up a physical server. You put the agent on that system and you do a backup, right? So you can put that same agent inside a virtual machine and back that up. Now, it doesn't scale very well. We want first-class citizenship inside our backup software. I thought Veeam was going to be first out of the gate with support on this, but it seems like they've pushed back a little bit. And now it looks like Commvault's going to come out and be the first vendor who's going to have first-class virtualization citizenship with VM Essentials. So that's coming, and I expect Veeam to come sometime after that. Zerto is also working on compatibility, but I'll talk a little bit about more about that later because I want to show you some things. All right, so we know what backups are. We know we can do snapshots. We know we've got incidences here. All right, I can go grab an incident, right, and I could do something like grab a console, right, and I'm grabbing a console at an incident level. So there could be multiple virtual machines in here, right, and if there were, when I clicked on console, it asked me what VM I'd want to connect to, but here's my console. I can connect into that. I could also get access to the console directly at the virtual machine level. So if I go to summary, I select the virtual machine, scroll down a little bit, we could see that I've got a console over here. All right, and again, I can interact with that. I could detach the console if you want. All right, so that's what an incident is. So what I'm going to try to do real quick, and you're going to have to apologize. Oops, let me stay logged in. If this doesn't work very well, because this is this VM Essentials incident is these three nodes here. So this is nested virtualization. So this works most of the time, but every once in a while it hiccups on me. But I'm going to try to show you HA in this environment. So let's see. So if I go over here to provisioning and incidences, you'll see I have a few virtual machines kind of created in here. Some of these are created like what I had in the other environment, but if I select this one again, I could scroll down and see the virtual machine itself, and I could see it's running on this host. So it's the third host. This is my second cluster with the third host. And if I go under infrastructure and go down to compute, right, we'll see the VMware ESX host that I'm managing, as well as these hosts as well. And there's that third host that virtual machine's running on. All right, and I'm going to select that host. And if I scroll down a little bit further, I'll see I've got VMs down here. I can see it's the only virtual machine that's kind of running on that host. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the plug on that, and everything goes right. This virtual machine should power up on another host. She stalls out once in a while. I'll power her up, and then I'll, recover the host, and we'll see if that virtual machine, the DRS-like feature, pushes it back. All right, so we'll go over here. I'm going to go over. We're going to power off that host. I'm going to click yes. All right, so she's gone. So now if I go into this virtual machine itself, all right, and I try to do a console, she's going to be gone. Now, what I will tell you from my experience, this is, I would say, probably just as the HA failover capabilities is probably just as fast as VMware, maybe slightly slower, but just as fast as VMware. Um, so we should see this pop up. It takes a little bit longer in this environment because it is a nested virtualized environment. So just keep that in mind. All right, so let's while we're waiting for that to happen, let's do some things inside this environment or talk about you know, different aspects of this solution. So all right, so let's go back over to incidences here, and let's talk about creating a virtual machine in this environment and what you need to pay attention to. So you're going to create a virtual machine in this environment by clicking the add button. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a virtual machine and start deploying one, but I'm going to do this in context with how you want to actually deploy a VM Essentials cluster. All right, and where things are kind of going. But this is just a virtual machine for this. All right, so I'm going to select HPE VM. All right, we're going to assign it to the group. Remember, the users and rights are done at a group level. The cloud, this would be the management incident, so the vCenter or the VM Essentials incident, and then we're going to give it a name, and I'm just going to call this thing delete me so I know to get rid of it later. I'm going to click next. Right, we're going to create a single VM, and I'm going to select how much CPU and RAM I want, and I'm going to do something that's kind of small, so I'm going to do just a small Ubuntu deploy, 2 CPUs, and 8 gigs of RAM. All right, we can add more hard drive space if we want. All right, I could put that on our Electra MP storage. I could select my networking, and if I didn't mention, the networking in this most resembles a distributed switch. All right, and then I'm going to grab an image, and I'll show you a little bit of an image. These are some ISOs that just exist in our environment. Probably should have showed that to you before. And then I could click next, but I'm going to halt here for a second and let's talk a little bit about deploying a virtual machine. If we're looking at VMware, all right, we have to make sure the virtual hardware is compatible. And VMware does a pretty good job of that, but every once in a while you grab the wrong operating system and it doesn't have the right hardware. And if you're installing Windows, you might not see the local hard drive or something like that. All right, so that is something that you can run into inside this environment as well. The drivers, the virtualized drivers are called VirtIO drivers. So let's back up and let's talk a little bit about what this is built on. So this Morpheus management platform. Well, let me say this before I go into this. A lot of people will say I'm going to wait for HP kind of to kick the tires a little bit on this. I'm not going to buy the version 1 of this solution, and I'll push back on that a little bit because this Morpheus management interface is in version 8. So Morpheus has been making this interface for a long time. All right, so that's something we don't have to worry about. As far as the underlying virtualization stack, right, it's built off of KVM. It's built out of other open source utilities like Open vSwitch, CoreSync. All right, it is built off QEMU, libvirt. Right, these are all virtualization solutions that the open source community has been creating for a long period of time. We're going way past 10 years, almost since the days that VMware first came out. All right, so they've been working on this. So this solution is available. As a matter of fact, your customer could download all those, but if you've dealt with anything that's kind of open source and in nature, sometimes it takes a long time to figure out how to interconnect these solutions, do it based on best practices, and work things out so you don't have any kinks in the plan. So sometimes open source solutions can take a lot of effort. That's one of the values that this solution gives you as you deploy this solution. It's setting up that entire stack so you don't need to worry about all of that, and you have a support mechanism to be able to call to if you do have problems with that. So at any rate, all right, as we go through deploying of a virtual machine, right, VirtIO is the open source virtualization drivers. Any version of Linux that's been out, for the last 10, 15 years will have these VirtIO drivers built into them, and you can just pretty much go through and install. Now, a Windows VM won't have the VirtIO drivers put them, not unless you inject them inside your ISO. Right. So to do that, if this was a Windows VM, what I would need to do is go down to advanced options and I would need to put the check mark in attach VirtIO drivers. And what this will do is it'll attach a CD-ROM with the drivers that you would need to do the deployment. So if you didn't do this, you're doing a Windows install, you'd get to the point where it asks you, where you want to install the hard drive, and you'd get a big black white square box in the center because you don't have anything, because it expects you to click on have a disk to show you the driver disk and install it. So what this will do is it'll either automatically detect it off the ISO, or you'll be able to click that have a disk and deploy it. Kind of like what you might have to do for a server if you have to install third-party RAID controller drivers or something like that. Right, so you need to attach the VirtIO drivers. Now I'm going to use this virtual machine to show you a little bit on the deployment of the systems, as far as the hypervisor host itself, some considerations. So I'm going to add a few NICs to this. We're going to add 4 NICs, and I'm just going to put a couple of on VLAN 82 and a couple of them on VLAN 81. Now, say you're going to, so aside, I'm not talking about the virtual machine itself. Say you're going to deploy VM Essentials, right? You've got compatible servers, you're going to deploy that within the environment. Right. What are some type of considerations do you need for the deployment from a networking perspective? Right. So what HPE wants you to gravitate to is 3 hosts. Right. If you're using, you don't need 3 hosts if you have a single host solution, or you're using 2 hosts with shared NFS storage, but there's no NFS storage on the compatibility list yet. But you can use 3 hosts. Um, uh, you can use 2 hosts with NFS, but they want you to use 3 hosts if you're going to have shared storage via iSCSI or fiber channel, like an Electra MP or something like that. Right? They need that in order to be able to do quorum inside this environment. All right, so you want to kind of gravitate to 3 hosts. I know I've had some people push back on that, but keep in mind that there's a lot of great single-socketed systems out there. You'll save money on the licensing by going to a single-socketed system. I already mentioned the DL325 Gen 11 server. That has many, many, many cores, right? You just need 1 license to be able to support that. All right, from a networking perspective on these hosts, they want you to gravitate towards 6 network adapters, and you can go down to 4. I'll talk about how you get down to 4, but with 6, what they expect you to do is 2 of them be put together in a bond for your management traffic. 2 of them you'll put in a bond for your production VLANs, and you could have multiple bonds for different network VLANs and things like that, so you can isolate network traffic if you want to. That's fine, but at a base you'll need 2 for your compute traffic or your normal production VLANs. And then the last 2 adapters they want you to use for your storage capabilities. So something like MPIO going to your shared storage would make sense. Now I said you could go down to 4. What they will tell you is you could create a VLAN on the compute traffic, your production VLANs. You could create a VLAN on that set of that bond of network adapters and use that for management traffic if you want to. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to pretend like I'm deploying this as this is going to be a VM, and I'll show you how to deploy Ubuntu kind of in the right way to be able to get this set up to be able to support this capability. But we're just doing a virtual machine right now, so I'm going to click next. All right. There are tasks that you could run with this if you want to. I'll show you a little bit about that. I'm going to click next again, and I'm going to click complete. Now, part of this, and we could see the little rocket ship, right? It's blasting off. When that turns green, I should be able to get a console out of that. Now, I pulled an ISO out of this to be able to do deployment. Where does that ISO sit? Now, that will sit up in the library, right? And you can have libraries for different things. You can certainly do automation tasks. So if I click add over here, and I don't know if you notice a part of the deployment, it asked me if there was a task that I want to run. That's what this is. It can be shell scripts, it can be PowerShell scripts. You just reboot the system. We can do it based on sudo if we felt like it, right? Also up here in the library, we have virtual images, and this is where my ISOs that I had pulled. But you can also have virtual machine template files as well if you want to, right? So, and that's what they kind of recommend, right? So getting a VM up and running as we're doing here, right? And this is green. All right, so you first have to have the drivers, you have to have the ISO in the library, you have to start the deployment. Now with VMware, once that virtual machine has finished its deployment, it comes up, what's the next thing that we do? Um, we usually install VMware tools. All right, so in Windows, right, when the system comes up, you will go back to that ISO, that VirtIO driver ISO, and you'll go in there, and there'll be something called QEMU guest agent. All right, and then you'll install that executable inside the environment, and that will do the VMware tools in there. All right, now if it's a Linux box, all right, so if I go back over here to incidences and I grab one of my Ubuntu incidences, maybe I'll just grab, it doesn't matter what I grab. We could do this guy here. I think I'm logged into this guy, and I go to a console to this guy. What you would do inside the virtual machine is type in, we'll do a clear here. You do sudo to do it as a administrator, and you do apt. And this is, all Linux distributions have different package managers. A lot of them use apt. So this is Ubuntu instance. So I use apt -get install QEMU guest agent. Now I'm not going to run this, but this would pull this down from out of the cloud and put that guest agent inside this environment, from the Ubuntu mirror servers that are out there. All right, and after that's done, the only other thing that you really need to do with a VM is you want to get the Morpheus agent installed. So if I go to this VM here and I go under actions, I should be able to install the Morpheus agent here. Am I at the right spot? Let's try a different system. Let's go over to, why don't we do this guy here? I don't know why it wasn't showing up over there. But I can go over here and then I could update agent. Now, if the agent wasn't already started, say install agent, it would deploy that agent. Once that was all done, I would take and I would convert this into a template inside the library, sysprep it or whatnot, and then use that over and over again. That would be the fastest way to deploy machines. All right, so that's kind of how you deploy a virtual machine inside VM Essentials. I would say it's not too much different than what you necessarily do inside VMware. But there's just some extra steps maybe you need to think about as a part of the deployment process. All right, so let's talk a little bit about deploying VM Essentials itself. How did I get to this point with this cluster, with these hosts inside this cluster? How did I get to this point? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get a host and you're going to install Ubuntu 2204 on them. No, excuse me, 2204 on each one of those hosts. You're going to do the updates on all those hosts. If you're going to do the software-defined storage, there's an extra little update that exists. Now, I'm showing you these things, or I'm describing these things to you, just so you have a feeling for the process for deployment of a new cluster out there. Obviously, all this stuff is well documented. Obviously, I'm around to ask you. You can ask questions too if you want to. I can't get on hours and hours post-sales troubleshooting things, but if you bounce a question off me, I'm more than willing to answer that. So at any rate, so you get a server, you install Ubuntu 2204. 2404 is in beta right now. As a matter of fact, if you download the latest version, you'll see some hints to that. You'll install that on there, and then what you'll do is you'll go over to HPE site and download the ISO. Now, you can download the ISO and mount it and install it inside your environment, and it'll run for 60 days without a problem. But after that, it will stop. Just so you're aware of that. So there's always, with the base version, there's always a 60-day trial that you can go through and actually deploy that within your environment. All right, so if we're going to go through and do that, we take the ISO. I might unzip it, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go putty into one of my machines here. We'll do 86.191. And I dropped 2 files up here. So you have to use like WinSCP if you want to. And you'll drop a couple files up in here. Oops. Am I typing that right? I do an ls, you'll see I have a couple files up here. So before I get to this point, let's go back and talk about the installation of Ubuntu and what you need to think about. So I've got this machine that we deployed. I'm going to take this. We're going to open this up real quick. All right, and I'm going to go into console. All right, and we'll see that this guy is starting to come up, doing the install. All right. And I'm just going to rattle through this real quick. We're going to install Ubuntu server. Now here's my 4 Ethernet adapter. So this would pretend this isn't a virtual machine. I'm deploying this on a physical system. How do I create these bonds that John was talking about? Right? If you know enough about NetPlan in Ubuntu, you could do that. But if you can also do this through the deployment process, and they make it really easy for you. See down here, you can create bonds, and we can see the names of the network adapters. So if I go down here and I create a bond, and I'm going to create a bond off these two, off these two NICs, right? And then I got to select a load balancing policy. And this looks different, but it's not anything that's too crazy. You can choose what they support is if your switches support 802.11ad, you can do that. If your switches aren't configured, you can't use that. They do balance XOR as well. So that's the 2 protocols they do support with this. So you use balance XOR if you didn't have the ability to use 802.11ad. All right, there you go. And you create that. You create the bond. In my case with this, if this was a host, I'm going to use these 2 network adapters and connect them through MPIO. But I said that, hey, we could ride our management traffic, right? Instead of creating a bond off 2 extra NICs, you could ride our management traffic as a VLAN, and that would be done up here. So if I select this, I go add a VLAN tag, and I would select my VLAN that I would want to use for that. So maybe I'll use 86, and then I'll click create. Now, you see how this is listed as bond 0 for my network adapter name, and this is listed bond 0 as x86. That'll become important later. All right, as we do this. So I'll push on through this, do the deployment. Everything will be fine. All right, and then like I said, once the deployment is done, right, I'm going to get these 2 files on one of the hosts, and on all the hosts, I'm going to install this file. All right, so this right here is what gives this system its virtualization personality. So I would want to deploy that Debian package on the system. So I would do a sudo apt install -f, and then it's going to be in this folder. So, and I'll do that. And I'll do that on as many hosts as I have, at least 3 hosts in my environment. And that will give me my HPE personality. Now, this other file here, you only need to put this on one of the systems. And this will be the QCOW image for this hypervisor. Excuse me, for this management interface. And the way you'd kind of go about deploying that, and again, this is all well documented. If I type in, once this is deployed, once the dev is deployed, I'll get an HPE VM. And I probably want to sudo that, right? HPE VM. And then we'd run this. Right. And then we could do some networking configuration on it, but this is kind of like your console, like ESX kind of has. And we can also install the VME manager. Now, I'm not going to go through that, but it's just a matter of pointing to where the file is inside the file system, giving it an IP address, giving it a gateway and things like that. And it would go out and actually deploy that in your environment. But that's kind of how you get the hypervisor host up and running. After that, you'll need to create your cluster, right? So you'd create a group. All right, that would be your management entity. You create your cloud. That would be this incident of VM Essentials. And then you create your cluster. All right, and the way you'd create your cluster is pretty straightforward. You click Add Cluster, select VM Essentials, click Next, select the group. Again, these are your rights and management. All right, there's your cloud. That'd be my VM Essentials cloud. We're going to give it a name. We'll give it some name. And I'll click Next. And then we start adding hosts. Now, if I'm going to add a single host, I'm just going to give it some name. Again, some name 1, and then put in the IP address. All right, if I'm going to do fiber channel storage, or I'm going to do iSCSI storage off an Electra MP, I'm going to need to add 3 hosts in order to be able to support that. If I want to do software-defined storage, remember I said this has a vSAN alternative. It's based off Ceph, right? What I would do, and notice I'm back down to 1 host, I'd go up here and I'd select a Ceph cluster, and this will use software-defined storage. Again, I'll need the IP address, and I'll give us everything a name. I'm going to put the username and password for the Ubuntu systems that I just showed you how to deploy, and then I start plugging things in. So I need the management interface. In my case, that was going to be bond 0.86. All right, and then my storage interface, I'll leave there. I could do my compute interface is going to be bond 0, and then I would do my VLANs. So I might do something like 8087, and then I'd go next, and this would go out and deploy that. So again, it's similar to how you'd set up, a VMware environment. You're going to get your hypervisor hosts all up and running, and then you're going to use the management software to kind of create your cluster inside your environment. All right, so we're getting near our time, so let's go back and see if high availability kicked in for us. Oops, did we stay connected? It may not have. All right, so the virtual machine's back up and running over here. If I click on this, so you can see it's running on VM Essentials 2. So it was on 3, so HA kicked in and powered this up on 2. Now, if we're lucky, we may not have enough time. I'm going to power this back on. It's going to come back in. My cluster is going to correct itself. So you go over here, we can see the failure happen. Right, this will turn green, and then the load balancing feature should move that virtual machine back on over. All right, so let's look at some other features that we have the ability to do inside this environment. So if I go over to this virtual machine here, it's called Move Me. Right now, this guy exists on VM Essentials 2, and I want to do a live migration to another host. So the vMotion alternative, I would go over here under Actions. I would select let's see, I'm at an incident level. I need to go to the virtual machine level. All right, so I go under Actions, and I do Manage Placement, and I'd move that on over to VM Essentials 1, and I click Save those changes. Now, being a VMware administrator, I'm used to seeing the bar across the bottom showing how things are progressing, but in this case, we have history, and if it doesn't show up, just do a refresh. Right? And it'll show up over here, and you get more information by clicking there, and even more information by clicking at that spot. All right, so we can get a lot of information on that. We'll come back and we'll take a look. We'll see that as we'll have migrated. We can also do the storage vMotion alternative, if you will. Right, so I got storage migration here. If I select this guy, right, and I look at storage, right, you can see it exists on local storage. So if this was a incident that contained multiple virtual machines, it would show me all of them. If I just wanted to narrow it down to the storage for the one virtual machine, which is what I have, again, I can go into that virtual machine, so compute, and then the VM name, go to storage, you'll see that exists on local. So if I wanted to migrate that to shared storage, I'd go under Actions, I would do Reconfigure, and see how this says local storage. I'm just going to change that to my Electra MP, click Reconfigure. All right, and we're going to see this guy start to migrate on over to shared storage. I would also be willing to guess by this time, we could go down to my Move Me virtual machine, and we could see where that guy exists. So that exists on VM Essentials 1. So that migration certainly did happen. And my Ubuntu incident is pretty small, so it might have already migrated on over to shared storage. So let's go take a look. No, it's still local, so it's still migrating, but we'll come back in and we'll see that that has happened. All right, so let's look at a few other things. Let's look at snapshots or backup capabilities inside this environment. So I have this virtual machine. I have some snapshots associated with it. So we're at an incident level, so backups are at an incident level. If I select backups, we could see I've got snapshots down here. We can also see that I don't have any backups listed up here near the top. All right, so I'm going to open up a console to this machine. I think we were already in this machine a little bit earlier. Right, and I'm going to do an LS. All right, we can see I have some important documentation here. So I know I'm in a Linux system, so this is a little different for some people. So LS would be a listing of files that exist. RM would remove files, right? And I could select specific files if I wanted to, but if I do a star, that's kind of the nuclear option. It's going to delete everything. So if I do an LS again, we can see all my files are gone. So, oh no, we need to revert this. So I'm going to go back over to the backups. And I'm going to select this snapshot and I'll revert that. All right, we'll come back and take a look, see if that happens in a little bit. I'm going to go back down to incidences and we'll go back over to my storage migration. We'll see if this guy has finished moving yet. We'll go into the VM itself, go into storage, and we can see that guy exists on the Electra MP. And of course, if I wanted to move that back, I would just, again, do a reconfigure and move that back to local storage. All right, so I can move that back and forth all I want. All right, let's go back over here. Let's see, what else can we show you? Oh, let's talk about backups. All right, so you can schedule backups. You can it does full backups as well as incremental. I'm doing some backups on this Ubuntu incident down here. So again, I'm going to select backups. Now I don't have any snapshots on this VM, but I have this backup here. All right, and it is a full backup. And I can do things like restore it, or I can even download it if I wanted to. It's going to download a big old file. It'll be 1.6 gigabytes. So I guess that's not too big. But if you have a VM that's like 1 terabyte and it's almost filled, you're gonna these are thin QCOWs are thin hard drive format. But if you download that and it's filled, you're gonna need a place to place that VM. Because it's gonna be pretty big. But I like that option of being able to download it and bring it someplace else if I wanted to. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click restore. So the way the restore process works is it takes and goes to the backup repository. I'm just going to call this delete. And if you notice, this looks a lot like a deployment. I'm going to click next again. I'm going to click next. I'm going to finish and complete. So what this is going to do, it's going to take and it's going to, from the backup repository, make a copy of that VM and put it inside the library. As a matter of fact, we might be able to see that in the library now. All right, and there it is. So it'll take and clone that, put it into the library, and then it'll actually deploy the virtual machine from this template that'll look as, or this QCOW image. So we might see that. We've got kind of like 5 minutes, so I'm trying to rush along, but we might be able to see that kind of come back up. I go back over to provisioning and incidences. All right, so we talked about backups. We talked about snapshots. We could also talk about, let's see if our snapshots came back. Let's see if we can see our files. Let's see. So if I log in here, oops, I logged in incorrectly. If I could type it in correctly, let me see. Last time, oh brother, up, totally bad. Let's try that one more time. All right, there we go. So we'll clear. Then I'll do a list of files, and we can see I got my files back. So let's talk a little bit about. Let's see if so it looks like in our secondary cluster, it looks like VM Essentials 3 came back up. So did the migration happen of that virtual machine back to VM Essentials 3? So here's that Move Me VM again. And if I go down here, you can see it was moved back. So the DRS-like feature certainly works within this environment as well. Now, the last thing I want to kind of relate to, I want to kind of fit this in is a lot of people ask, what about conversion of virtual machines from VMware into VM Essentials? So the way that works today is you're going to need to manage a VMware environment. You're going to need to get the VMDK file up within this infrastructure. And a lot of the marketing material is telling you is if you get that within your library, right? Let me see, I might have over here a VMDK file. So here's a VMDK file. What you should be able to do is take a check mark in a box and do a conversion on it, or do a conversion over here. At least that's what the marketing material is showing. I haven't seen that yet. It should be coming at some point where you can do a conversion, right? But till then, what you can do is you can get the VMDK file in here, and there's a bunch of open source utilities that'll convert a VMDK file into a QCOW2, and then you can deploy that within your environment. The only thing I have to add on that is, and there's documentation on the process for doing that as well. Now, the only thing I have to add on that is obviously there's downtime that's associated with that, and the downtime is going to be as long as your virtual machine is large. Now, what they're hoping to do in the future is to use Zerto. So they want to get Zerto integration in this, and they want to set up a replication. And if you don't know what Zerto is, it's virtual machine based replication, up to the minute of replication of a virtual machine inside an environment. So they want you to get a replication happening from VMware into VM Essentials, right? And then press the button and fail it on over and bring it on up so you can have that instantaneous. Zerto support they're looking for, by the end of the year. That's out there. They also have migration licenses that are available as well. So those are your options for converting things on over inside an environment, right? But managing a VMware environment is not too hard. All you need to do is go up to Clouds, click Add, right? Select VMware, click Next, right? Give it a name inside this interface, right? Give it the URL for your vCenter server, append SDK on the end, and then put your credentials in. Right, and then you'll just click next, and this is going to come in. Now, the only other thing I'd like to point out is if I click on this VMware environment and I go to VMs, you can see I've got a bunch of VMs that exist here, right? But if I go over to provisioning and incidences, I only have 2 VMs listed here. So what gives? How does that happen? Well, what you have to do to get the incident to be created, right, which gives you the full management status of this, right? So I'm back over in the virtualized in the VMware environment. Is you're going to select the VM and then do actions and convert to manage, and that will create the incident, put the virtual machine in that incident, and then you have the ability to start, stop it, interact with that virtual machine, clone that virtual machine, use the Morpheus backup or the VM Essentials backups, back it up to S3 and things like that, right? Then you have the ability to be able to do things like that. You can convert it as a template. You get the full management capabilities of this system. All right, so I've used up all my time. I'm gonna stop sharing, and I am available for questions if anybody wants to come off mic and ask me any questions about this. But I think I'm done unless somebody has some questions they wish to ask.
John, there are some questions for you in the
Are there?
chat.
Let me go take a look. What do we got? A whole bunch of stuff. Sorry. Yep, we could. Getting started. Here, let me scroll it. Yes, this certainly does require a Linux base install. I had some people push back and say, I don't know much about Linux. What am I to do? I will say that you probably know more about Linux than you do realize. If you look at an ESX CLI, that's very Linux in nature, and the navigation of that is Linux in nature. And it's probably about time to kind of, look at supporting Linux within your environment. I mean, the last buzzwords that have been out there have all been Linux-based: containers, big data, AI. Certainly is a Linux topic, so he's doing that on the back end on a Windows system. So the time is now to learn Linux. The setup can be the hardest part. I'm here to help you. HPE is in negotiation with Ubuntu to have an integrated installer on one ISO, if you will, that you can probably put on a USB drive and deploy. So stay tuned for that. They're certainly working on that. So somebody was asking, this is on-prem management. Yes, this is on-prem management. This is not within the GreenLake platform. When they integrate PCBE or DHCI, there will be management from up in the cloud at that point. I think I gave you guys the roadmap for Zerto integration. The networking's not too bad. I hope I gave you some information on that through the deployment, and I'm just going through these questions. But if you have a hard time with that, feel free to ask, and I'll answer some questions on that. So Horizon is something that's coming. GPU pass-through is something that's coming as well. Sit tight. sooner rather than later is what I'm going to tell you related around to that. And I think I've hit all the questions. If I missed somebody's question, certainly, come off mute and ask me some questions. If not, we can close this up. Keep in mind, I'm here to not do such as technical demonstration for your end users. I'll keep it high level, but if you need me to show some of this to your customers, show it's a functioning product, show vMotion, show live migration, show those things, I'm certainly available for that. So if there are no more questions, I think we can close this session up.
Thanks,
All right,
everyone. We'll
everybody.
send out a
Yeah.
recording.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.